In this module, we're going to be talking about mobile device culture and the cultural and lifestyle changes that have taken place within society as a direct result of our adoption and our reliance on these devices. We're going to spend the main part of this module focusing on text messaging and text speak. Because it has been a driving force in really mainstreaming the cultural inclusion of the mobile device into modern society. And of course, as mobile media designers, it's important that we know and understand the cultural significance of our targeted platform, which of course is the mobile device. So how has the mobile device infiltrated our culture? Well, clearly, it's done a spectacular job of solidifying its place as a necessary object in many of our lives. And it's done this in a really short span of time. But how do we feel about this infiltration? I mean, the mobile device is everywhere. In the reading, one of our authors from the readings this week states bluntly and perhaps a bit crudely that, and this is in quotes, public restroom stalls are supposed to be, in my mind anyway, a place of solace and minimal conversation. This quiet place has been violated by people who feel the need to do business while they do business. So again, a bit crude, but I think the point comes across. And that being, of course, that our mobile devices are everywhere, and they have infiltrated every part of modern lifestyle. I think it's interesting that we've all encountered something like this bathroom scenario before. The use of a mobile device in a place where it might not necessarily be appropriate. What's even more interesting is that as these devices become even more of an integral part of our person, this question of appropriateness may evaporate altogether. But yes, even though it seems like these mobile devices are everywhere, as Americans, we've been somewhat slow to adopt the cell phone into our culture in the way that other parts of the world have. As we'll discover in the reading, the European adoption of mobile device as not only a communication tool, but as a fashion accessory puts that of our own adoption to shame. We see that here too, of course, with plastic jewels glued to the outside of phones and ringtones and things of that nature. But in European countries, changing a cell phone is somewhat akin to changing one's shoes for a night out. Europeans have a tendency to get new phones way more often than we do. The phone itself is simply a wrapper for the SIM card, which connects the user's account to that particular device. Here in the US, it's a bit tricky because we have different and incompatible cell carriers, where in Europe it's mostly dominated primarily by GSM carriers. Another huge cultural difference is IMing, instant messaging, versus texting, text messaging. Historically speaking, here in the US, during the early years of the internet, AOL was able to take a stranglehold on the instant communications market. This, of course, became the de facto form of instantaneous communication, and all before text messaging via mobile device was even available. Because the personal computer was such an integral part of American culture first, and because in Europe, internet connections were fewer in number, things played out the way they did. In Europe, there was less competition for text messaging. So now that we've brought it up, let's really talk about this text messaging thing. Love it or hate it, it's here, and it's proven to be a viable avenue for communication. But the text message is a whole different breed of communication. Generally, a text message, or SMS message, which stands for Short Message Service, is a short message consisting of no more than 160 characters. Most text messages, however, clock in at about 20 to 30 characters. Text messages are typically small sentences that omit all unnecessary words and phrases to get their intended meaning across. The most commonly texted message is K, as in okay, as in a confirmation of a statement or a request. Most often punctuation is ignored too. And this is mainly the case for two reasons. The first is, of course, that 160 character limit. The second, and probably the more interesting of the two, is that these messages are typed out on a 0 to 9 keypad. It's difficult to be grammatically correct when typing on a device whose buttons need to be clicked on 4 times to get an S, and 5 times to get a capital S. So as a result, text messaging has developed its own language, a sort of text messaging shorthand, which scholarly folk like us, who have a tendency to think too hard about things like this, call text speak. So let's look at some examples of commonly used text speak. There are so many of them, and here are just a few. and some are more obvious than others. Here's a few examples. And interestingly, texting has its own regional or cultural dialects too. So some of these only make sense in certain areas. Here, see if you can translate this sentence. So the next thing to mention is that most text messages fit into one of the following 6 categories: asking, connecting, appealing, confirming, flirting, and forwarding. This is all in your reading, and we'll talk about it more on the discussion board. But why is this? Is this a characteristic exclusive to texting alone, or is it a part of all communications? Just some things to think about. So this time on the discussion board, you're going to talk about a few different things. First, we'll talk about your thoughts on mobile media culture, how it's evolved and where it's headed. Then we'll talk about texting, how it's changing our language and our communication. There'll be a few exercises to participate in involving textspeak and texting. And then there will be a writing assignment for you with a few options as well. Of course, I provided you with some materials to read and some links too, but when you're doing your writing, you might want to do a search for whatever else is out there. Google, LexisNexis, all good resources. And that's it for now. So I'll see you guys on the discussion board.